She walked into my house like she already owned it. That was the first thing I noticed about my daughter's boyfriend the night she brought him home for Thanksgiving dinner. Not him, actually. The way she walked in ahead of him, scanning the living room, the kitchen, the back deck overlooking the lake, doing a quiet calculation behind her smile. My daughter was still on the front step shaking snow off her boots. He was already inside, shaking my hand, telling me what a beautiful home I had. His name was Adrian. 36 years old, my daughter had told me on the phone the week before. Self-employed consultant. Very successful. You're going to like him, Dad. I'm 63. I spent 31 years as a civil litigation lawyer in Hamilton, Ontario before I retired. I have sat across the table from some extraordinarily convincing people. I know what a practiced smile looks like. I know the difference between someone who's genuinely at ease and someone who has rehearsed being at ease. Adrian was the second kind. But my daughter was 31 and she was happy, and I had not seen her this happy in a long time, so I smiled back. I poured him a scotch. I asked him about his work. He said he did strategic consulting for mid-sized companies going through operational transitions. He said it in a way that was just vague enough to sound important, but specific enough to deflect follow-up questions. I had heard that kind of answer before too. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's all that matters here, had been living in Toronto for 6 years. She was a project manager at a construction firm. She was careful with money the way I'd raised her to be, and she had done well for herself. A condo in Leslieville, a reasonable RSP, a car she owned outright. She was proud of those things, and she had every right to be. She met Adrian 8 months before that Thanksgiving. He came into her world fast. Within 2 months, he was at her place most nights. Within 4, he had suggested they look at buying a property together. Something bigger, outside the city. A fresh start, he called it. She told me this over the phone in September, and something in my chest tightened when she said it. I didn't say anything. I asked how things were going with work, and I listened, and I filed it away. That Thanksgiving, he was charming. He helped clear the table. He asked my wife about her garden. He told a story about a hockey game he'd been to at Scotiabank Arena. The kind of story that's designed to make you feel included, laughing at the right moments. My wife liked him. My son-in-law, my other daughter's husband, shrugged at me across the table in that way that meant he's fine, I guess. My daughter looked at Adrian the way you look at someone you've decided to trust completely. That was the part that stayed with me after they drove back to Toronto. December came. My daughter called me 2 days before Christmas, and her voice was different. Not upset, exactly. Careful. She told me that she and Adrian had found a property in Prince Edward County. A hobby farm, basically. 4 acres, an old farmhouse, a barn. They were going to renovate it together. Split the purchase price. She had already spoken to her mortgage broker. I asked her what Adrian's contribution would be. There was a pause. He was waiting on a consulting payment, she said. A large project had wrapped up and the client was slow to pay. It happens sometimes in his business, she said. He'd explained it to her. Once it cleared, he'd transfer his half of the down payment directly to the lawyer's trust account. But the closing was in 3 weeks, and the timing was tight, so she was going to put in the full amount herself for now, just to secure the property. He would reimburse her. The full down payment was $160,000. I kept my voice very steady. I asked her how long they had been together. 8 months, she said. 9 almost. I asked whether she had seen documentation of this consulting payment, a contract, a statement of account, anything. She said Adrian had shown her some emails. I asked if she had spoken to a lawyer independently, not a shared one, just her own lawyer about the structure of the agreement. She said she hadn't gotten that far yet. I said okay. I said I was sure Adrian was great. I said I just wanted her to be protected, the way any father would. I asked her to send me the property details, and to please not sign anything until we had talked again after Christmas. She agreed. She sounded a little relieved, actually. I think part of her had wanted someone to pump the brakes. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. My wife came in and I told her what was happening. She sat down too. Neither of us said much. We had built that house from nothing, the two of us. We knew what $160,000 meant. I called my former partner at the firm the next morning. He still practiced, and he owed me a favor from 2019 that neither of us had forgotten. I gave him Adrian's full name and asked him to run a quiet search. Court records, corporate registry, anything public. I told him I needed it before New Year's. He called me back on December 28th. He found 3 things. The first was a small claims judgment from 2019 in British Columbia. A woman had sued Adrian for $18,400, claiming he had borrowed the money as a personal loan and never repaid it. She won by default because Adrian never appeared. The second was a dissolved Ontario corporation, registered in Adrian's name in 2020 and struck off the corporate registry in 2022 for failure to file annual returns. The stated business, management consulting. The third was a name variation. Adrian had used a slightly different version of his surname on the BC court documents than the one he used in Ontario. It was a small change. 1 letter. The kind of thing that might be a clerical error or might be something else entirely. My partner said he could dig further, but it would take time. I said thank you and that I'd be in touch. I needed to see him again before I said anything to my daughter. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. My daughter had invited me and her mother to Toronto for New Year's Eve, a small dinner at her condo, just the 4 of us. Adrian would be there. I went. I brought a bottle of Riesling from Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I was perfectly pleasant all evening. I asked Adrian about the Prince Edward County property. He talked about it enthusiastically, the renovation plans, the potential for a short-term rental operation in the summers, the lifestyle. He said things like building equity and long-term investment. He said them fluently. At one point, my daughter went to the kitchen to check on something, and Adrian's girlfriend, my daughter, his girlfriend, was out of the room. And it was just the 2 of us for a moment. I asked him, conversationally, how the consulting payment was coming along. He said, any day now, with a relaxed smile, and took a sip of his wine. Any day now. The same words, I was fairly certain, he had used with the woman in British Columbia. My daughter came back in and I shifted the conversation. We talked about other things. I watched him. He was good. He was very good. But I had 31 years of practice watching people perform their innocence, and there is always something, some tiny inconsistency in the texture of the performance. With Adrian, it was his eyes when he talked about money. Most people, when they talk about money they're excited about, look slightly animated. Adrian's eyes went slightly flatter, like he was reciting rather than remembering. We drove back to Hamilton on January 2nd. I told my wife what I'd found and what I'd observed. She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to find out more before I say a word to our daughter. I want to explain why I didn't go straight to her then. I know some people would have, but I had seen, in my years of practice, what happens when a parent drops allegations on a child about someone they love before the evidence is solid. The child defends the partner. The relationship between parent and child fractures. The partner uses that fracture. I was not going to let that happen. I was going to be certain. My former partner pulled the thread further. He found a civil claim in Alberta from 2021. A different complainant, different province, similar pattern. A woman in Calgary. A loan. A real estate transaction that never materialized. A settlement that included a non-disclosure clause, which is why it was harder to find. 2 provinces. 2 women. The same structure. Get close, establish trust, create urgency around a property or an investment, borrow or access money, delay, and then eventually disappear or restructure. My daughter's $160,000 closing was scheduled for January 22nd. It was January 9th. I drove to Toronto on January 11th. I did not tell my daughter I was coming. I texted her that morning and said I was going to be in the city for an errand, and could I stop by for lunch? Just the 2 of us. She said, of course, Adrian was working anyway. I brought sandwiches from a deli on Queen Street, and I sat across from her at her kitchen table, and I laid it out carefully and clearly the way I used to present evidence. Not accusation. Evidence. The BC judgment. The dissolved corporation. The Alberta pattern. The name variation. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "He told me about the BC thing. He said it was a misunderstanding with an ex-girlfriend who was vindictive." I said, "He may have, and it may even be partly true, but one incident is a story. 2 incidents in 2 different provinces with 2 different women and a dissolved company is a pattern, and the pattern has a closing date of January 22nd attached to it." She looked out the window toward the street. Her hands were flat on the table. She said, "I already wired him $12,000 last month for renovation estimates." I closed my eyes for just a moment. Then I opened them. I said, "Okay, let's talk about what we do now." We spent 3 hours at that table. I walked her through every option. Stop the closing. Her mortgage broker confirmed the deposit was refundable at this stage given the circumstances. Consult her own lawyer independently before any further steps. I had a name ready. A real estate litigator I trusted. And regarding the $12,000, document everything. Preserve every text and email. Do not confront Adrian yet. Do not transfer a single dollar more. She asked me if I was sure. About all of it, I told her I was sure about the facts. I told her I was not certain what Adrian intended, in the sense that I could not read his mind. But I told her that the facts, standing alone, were enough. She did not need to prove intent. She needed to protect herself. She cried, once, briefly, and then she stopped, and she got practical, the way she has always gotten practical when things are hard. I have always admired that about her. She called Adrian that evening. I was not there for the call. She told him she needed to pause on the property, that she was having second thoughts about the timing. She was calm. She gave him nothing to react to. He was understanding, she said afterward. Almost too understanding. He said he completely respected her feelings and they could talk about it whenever she was ready. That told me more than a protest would have. Over the next 2 weeks, with her own lawyer's guidance, she formally withdrew from the purchase agreement. The deposit came back. She preserved the documentation of the $12,000 transfer, the bank records, the text messages where he had asked for it, the message where he had confirmed receiving it. She did not hear from Adrian for 11 days after she paused the purchase. Then she got a text asking how she was. She did not respond. Her lawyer sent a formal demand letter for the $12,000 on February 3rd. Adrian's response, through an email, no lawyer, just him, was that the money had been used for legitimate renovation consultations and that he had receipts. He did not attach the receipts. He said he would provide them shortly. He did not. She filed in small claims court on February 18th. Ontario small claims goes up to $35,000, and her claim was well within it. The process was not fast, but it was clear he did not respond to the claim. Not within the 30-day window. Not at all. On April 4th, my daughter received a default judgment in her favor for $12,000 plus filing costs. I was at my desk at home when she called to tell me. She had that tone she's had since she was small, when she has solved something difficult and is trying not to sound as pleased as she actually is. I recognized it immediately. It is one of my favorite sounds in the world. She has not recovered the money yet. Enforcing a civil judgment takes time, and Adrian has not made it easy. But the judgment is real, and it is registered, and it will follow him. These things have a way of accumulating until they cannot be ignored. She is not buying a farm in Prince Edward County. She is staying in her condo in Leslieville, which she owns, which no one can take from her. She took a weekend trip to Quebec City with a friend in March, and she sent me a photo of herself standing in the snow outside the Chateau Frontenac, smiling in the genuine way, the way I had not seen in a while. I printed that photo and put it on the shelf in my office. I've been asked since then whether I feel any sympathy for Adrian. It is a fair question. I've represented enough people on both sides of difficult situations to know that human beings are complicated and that desperation takes many forms. But sympathy and accountability are not mutually exclusive. He made choices. The choices had consequences. That is how it is supposed to work. What I feel most, honestly, is grateful. Grateful that my daughter texted me back when I reached out. Grateful that she sat at that kitchen table and listened and trusted the evidence over the story. Grateful that 31 years of watching people carefully turned out to be useful for something more important than a courtroom. Some things, it turns out, you carry your whole career without knowing exactly why. Until the day your daughter needs you to know them. I keep coming back to the moment she slid that note across the kitchen table in Leslieville. Not the note itself, the decision behind it. She could have said nothing. She could have let the closing date arrive and wired the money and told herself it would work out. A lot of people do exactly that. Instead, she called me, let me come over, and sat still while I laid out things she didn't want to hear about someone she cared about. That took something. It took more than most people realize. What Adrian counted on, what people like Adrian always count on, is that affection clouds judgment. And it does for a while. My daughter is not naive. She's careful, and she's sharp, and she had built something real for herself entirely on her own. But she was also 8 months into believing in someone, and belief has its own momentum. Adrian understood that. He timed everything around it. The urgency of the closing date, the reasonable explanation for the delayed payment, the gradual accumulation of small transfers before the large one. None of it was accidental. It was a system. And systems like that only fail when someone stops and asks a simple question. Where is the actual evidence? That's what I asked her. Not whether she trusted him. Not whether she loved him. Where is the documentation? Show me the contract. Has your own lawyer reviewed this independently? Those are not romantic questions. They're not even particularly warm questions. But they are the right ones, and asking them is a form of care that doesn't always feel like care in the moment. I think about the woman in British Columbia, the one who won her small claims judgment in 2019 and never saw Adrian in the courtroom. I wonder if she had someone she could have called. I wonder if the outcome would have been different. I don't know her name or her circumstances, and it's not my place to judge what she did or didn't have around her. But I think about her. The $12,000 my daughter lost still bothers me. The judgment is there. The enforcement is slow. That's the reality of civil litigation. The mechanism works, but it works on its own timeline, and the person who caused the harm gets to make the recovery inconvenient. My daughter knows this now in a way that no amount of explaining could have taught her. She filed anyway. She followed the process anyway. Not because she was certain she'd see the money, but because the alternative was to let it go entirely, and she decided that wasn't acceptable. I think that decision, more than any other part of this story, is the one I'm proudest of. There's something that happens when a person goes through an experience like this and comes out the other side with their judgment intact. They don't become cynical. Or at least, my daughter hasn't. She went to Quebec City in March and she sent me that photo and she looked like herself. What changed is that she's more precise now, more willing to ask the uncomfortable question early, before the costs of asking it have gotten high. That precision is hard-won. It doesn't come from being told to be careful. It comes from having been careless once, in a specific way, with specific consequences, and choosing to learn exactly what went wrong. That's all any of us can really do. Take the experience honestly, understand the mechanism, and make sure that the next time the urgency fee is manufactured, and the documentation is always just about to arrive, we stop sooner. The photo is still on my shelf.